Hello, everyone. I'm back with Preston Dennett, and a third in this particular series on out of body experiences. Today, we're going to talk about out of body experiences as they relate to his primary area of interest, which is as a UFO researcher. So, Preston, as you relate to OBEs, have any of your OBEs interacted with the UFO phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps not to the degree that I would like, but to a certain extent. And I'm not unique in this area. I know Robert Monroe talked about meeting an ET and going in, a UFO, I think, at one point. And Bruce Moen did this as well, repeatedly. I'm all about UFOs. That's how I got involved in this. It came hand in hand, by the way. When I started doing UFO research, that's when I started having out-of-body experiences, which turns out probably not to be coincidental, because this is something a lot of contactees talk about, certainly. There's some weird connection there. And having researched UFOs for so many years, it's only a matter of time before this was on my list. You sort of have a bucket list of all the things you want to do. Mm-hmm. And so hearing about other people doing these sort of things, going to other planets, exploring space, exploring perhaps UFO hotspots on Earth, Area 51. It's definitely something I'd love to talk about. But I think the first time it ever happened was I just shouted out, I'd like to see an ET, an alien. I want to see an alien. And one appeared in front of me. And it was not a gray, as we would think of it, or a praying mantis or anything like that. And I was kind of put off by it because it looked so unusual.
Mm-hmm. Can you describe it?
Yeah, it was short, 4 feet tall, and wearing clothes, but not normal. I mean, it wasn't a jumpsuit or anything. It was more, I don't even know how to describe it, just like a cloak or something. It wasn't a robe. It was just, I don't know, just weird clothes. And it was just on its torso, but it had a face that was dog-like, almost, with a snout. And weird kind of eyes and a very small head and legs that bent the wrong way. And I'm like, well, this what? And I kind of had the feeling this was a mental projection coming from my own imagination, but it's hard to tell sometimes. I mean, usually I can tell right off the bat this is a real person, but this was like an alien. Something. I was so kind of shocked by the appearance of it that I just stared in awe for just a second and then got pulled away by my own emotional reaction to it. So I was a little disappointed with that experiment or experience, but it was interesting to say the least. And another time, I woke up out of body on board a UFO inside a small rounded room. And I'm looking around and like, oh my gosh, this looks like a UFO. And I'm looking around and there was a person standing next to me and I recognized them as the author of a book I had just bought on near-death experiences. She was a near-death experiencer. And I'm looking at her, wow, what are you doing here? And again, that was so shocking to see her. And
was this her physical body or her?
Well, I don't know, but I felt like it wasn't.
Okay.
I think her name was Hashi Hanti, a Native American lady who'd written a near-death book. And I was so shocked that I instantly got pulled back. And so again, I was disappointed with how that kind of turned out. It was just too brief. Probably my best and really truest experience with what I would call an alien was I was just trying to get to the other side once. And I'm flying along and I'm flying straight up into this cloudy realm that precedes like popping out to the other side, to, the true astral realms, as opposed to being here on Earth, sort of. So I'm flying straight up and I'm getting into this very cloudy area with all kinds of clouds and stuff. And I see something ahead of me. And I'm like, well, what is that? And it looks like a pair of eyes, large, dark eyes. As I get closer, I'm like, yeah, that's someone looking at me, all right. And they're right in my path. And I'm zooming along and I come right up to them fairly quickly. And as I'm within, 20 feet, I'm like, that is a gray alien if I've ever seen one. And I'm right up next to it, and the guy is, a gray alien, big head, large dark eyes, pale skin, looking at me with his. I mean, we locked gazes, and he was about 3 feet away from me as I'm flying by him, and he looks at me going by, and I look at him. And I was so shocked. I mean, my heart leapt up into my throat. I was just absolutely shocked to see anything like that. And now I regret not stopping and saying, "Hey, dude, what's up?"
So you didn't communicate at all?
No, I didn't, because I did have a little bit of fear. More shock than fear. I was really utterly shocked, because I'd never seen that sort of thing before, and just looked at him real quick and like, wow, wow, and kept going. But yeah, he was a little gray, absolutely, a little gray alien. That was really vivid and very real to me. That's been the only real time that I've met an ET face to face. So I did have another experience where I was taken to meet somebody, and they were not human. They were an ET, and it was not like any I've ever read about. I ended up calling a contactee. She's like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of this type, but I've never seen one." And it had no neck. It was a rounded body, cylindrical almost, and had eyes that were very widely spaced on the outside and reminded me of kind of like a dolphin with this sort of gray, shiny skin that was slightly iridescent. But I've never ever read about this or heard about anything like this. But it came up and it shook my hand, and it was fin like. It had like kind of like that. Let me see. Is what it reminded me of, like that. Mm-hmm. And shook my hand, and I was fascinated because it was very chunky and very short and stocky. And that one had a real honest to God presence to it. And I felt very humbled by it. So, and that was, I couldn't even tell you the environment because I was just so shocked to see this weird looking figure, which was shorter than me, but not much shorter. So yeah, these sort of things are what I've experienced. But I haven't really taken it to the level I would like to, where I can just sit down and talk to an ET flat out. I've only now recently gotten to the point where I can sit down and have conversations with people, because it's very overwhelming, very humbling, and it's hard to bring back. There's been many times I've had long conversations with my mom, and I don't remember a bloody thing. Just like we talked. It was about, my life or what she's doing. I have had conversations with my brothers and sisters on the other side, which was really bizarre, because I ran up and I saw my brother Steven. I'm like, "Steven, what are you doing here? We're out of body. You know that, right?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I know it." I'm like, "Oh, you do? Really?" Because he's skeptical. I was like shocked to hear him say that. Like, "You really, you're out of body?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Oh, well, let's talk about this when we get back." He's like, "Oh no, I can't. I'm not going to remember." I'm like, "What are you talking about? You're not going to remember? We're here right now." He's like, "I don't have that ability. I'm sorry." I'm like, "Well, how can you say that? I'm going to remember. If I can remember, you can remember." And he's like, "No, I can't. I'm sorry." We got in a little bit of an argument. I'm like, just remember." And he's like, "I can't." I'm like, "Yes, you can." He's like, "No, I can't."
Was it that he doesn't want to, or is that he's actually physically incapable of remembering?
I'd like to know. And that's what we were kind of arguing about. He said, "No, I just don't have that ability. I'm not there yet." I don't know. I don't honestly know. And I had the same thing with my sister. It was another experience. I'm like, "Victoria, we're out of body. You know that, right?" She's like, "Yeah, we're in the in-between place." I'm like, "Oh, okay, the in-between place. That's interesting. Will you remember this?" She says, "No, I'm not going to remember this. I can't do it." like, well, have you tried? She's like, well, no, not really.
Okay.
And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I can help you. She's like, I don't know. I don't think so, but you can try if you want. I'm like, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to manifest a UFO. Because you can create thought forms with your mind. You think it and it will appear. And you can have all kinds of fun with this, building houses and forests and people. And just, it's amazing. By just thinking it, you can create. I mean, I've done it with food and all kinds of stuff. And I got really good at it. When you're on a certain level, there's a place you can do this. And that's where we were. And so I said, okay, I'm going to create a UFO. And I did. And it was a beautiful saucer with metallic mirror finish, chrome, little portholes, colored lights. I mean, I did a good job. I was really proud of myself. I'm like, look at that. And my sister's like, wow, that is amazing. And I said, do you think you'll remember that? Because that's memorable. And she's like, I might. I hope so. I'll try. And so I'm like, okay, I can't ask more than that. And off we went on our merry way. And I woke up. I'm like, all right, I'm going to call her up. I'm like, did you have any dreams? That's my sort of introduction. I'm like, did I have any dreams last night? She didn't. Had no dreams. Does not remember anything. I've tried this with my brothers and sisters repeatedly. And they don't remember. I had some success with my sister-in-law, Christy, who did have out-of-body experiences. And I went over to her house and we flew around and I called her up. I'm like, do you remember? I went out of body. You were there. We went. She's like, I do. We had a dream. And I remember flying with you, but it was a dream to her. But I'm like, I was awake, Christy. And I did it with my brother, Mark. We had what is essentially a shared dream. But yeah, not a whole lot of success with that. But yeah, did visit Area 51. That was cool.
What did you see there?
I had read about this in Fate magazine. They wrote an article like, all right, we want our readers to go out of body and visit Area 51 or remote view it. Remote viewing is very much like an out of body experience. You're just sending a piece of your consciousness, which I've done successfully a few times. It's a little bit different, but essentially the same thing. But they're like, hey, give your psychic impressions, go out of body, do remote viewing, whatever. And they did a follow-up article, and all the respondents were women. I thought that was kind of interesting. They had like 20 people who had psychic impressions or went out of body or what have you, and described all the things we've heard from Bob Lazar and other people that I would call Area 51 whistleblowers. And there are quite a few of them who describe there's various levels and various reverse engineering going on of ET technology and genetics experiments and biological warfare experiments and so forth. So I thought, okay, after reading that, I'm like, this sounds interesting. Some of the people who went there saw grays, and the grays looked up at them and saw them, and were not happy to be spied on by these out-of-body explorers. So I'm like, well, that sounds a little scary, but I'm going to try this. How hard can it be? If other people can do it, that's always been my MO. If they can do it, so can I. So I popped out of body one morning, went through the roof, and I'm floating about 50 feet above the house and just absorbing the crystal-like beauty of it, which is really overwhelming and so shocking every time. Like I said, I'm like, wow, here I am out of body. What was I going to do? Who cares? This is so beautiful. Let's just sit here and absorb this, and this is amazing. But I was really fully conscious and had a lot of energy to stay aware for a good period of time. So I'm like, okay, what did I want to do? What did I want to do? I'm thinking. What was on my bucket list? What did I want to do? And I remembered Area 51. I'm here in California. It's in Nevada, several hundred miles away. I'm like, okay, Area 51, let's do this. And you set the intention in a very much present tense. Because if you say, I want to go to Area 51, that just sets up the conditions of wanting to go. You have to say, I go now to Area 51 in a very determined way. And I did it, and something grabbed my body, a force. I started spiraling towards Area 51. And I'm like, just kind of moving along at 20, 30 miles an hour. I'm like, this is not going to do it. I need to go faster, 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 faster. And I really set the intention. And when that happens is when you teleport, or what I would call teleporting, where you instantly like blink out and you appear in the location you're set. I've traveled from LA to San Diego that way. It's awesome. And sometimes you like zoom, zoom, zoom over the freeway. It's really fast and it's all a blur of color. Other times you just kind of blink out and blink back in, because space and time is sort of an illusion. It's a product of the physical plane. And when you pop out on the other side, that sort of collapses a little bit and time becomes different. Like I mentioned earlier, you can sometimes see future events, which has happened, or past events for that matter. But at any rate, I'm like, all right, Area 51, here we go. And I popped out over Groom Lake. I recognized it immediately from pictures. And as I'm coming in for a landing, my first thought is like, people are never going to believe this. There's no way I can tell people this because they're not going to believe me. But I don't believe it myself. It's like shocking to find yourself there. And my first thought was like, wow, this is much vaster than I had ever imagined. Because I kind of imagined it as a cluster of buildings and hangars all together. But no, they were very widely spaced, miles and miles apart, some of them. And I saw guys walking around in green military fatigues, soldiers, young men. I'm standing next to a hangar. Saw one way, way off in the distance. And it was Groom Lake. I'm like, wow, I've actually made it. This is amazing. I'm standing on the ground and I'm like, this is so thrilling. I can't believe I did this. Now I should probably go inside. Let's go inside. And I thought to myself, I wonder if there are aliens there. I wonder if there's grays. And will they see me? And I started to go in. And as I got closer and closer, the fear started to build up on me. I'm like, if one of those grays looks at me and sees me, I'm not sure how I'm going to react. And I felt a real sense of fear. And I was really regretted it because I felt myself instantly pulled back into my body and I woke up really disappointed and was determined to revisit this, which I did. But it became such a weird, dark experience that I forgot quite a bit of it. And it came back largely as a dream recall, though I knew it was an out-of-body experience just because of the quality of it. And what I remember is not really going to Area 51, but being inside of it with a guide. This time I had a guide and there was a few other people. And they're like, you wanted to see Area 51? Well, here you go. There's something you should see. I'm like, okay. And this was like being in an underground building, huge, like as big as a shopping mall is, but reversed, underground, vast, acres of structure going deep underground. And I felt like we were like 3-4 stories down. And it was hard for me to maintain awareness because there was a very dark, negative energy there, which didn't feel like, like the heavenly realms. And it was hard for me to maintain awareness in this sort of, it was just dark, negative. And I don't like that energy. And it was hard for me to like even be there. It's like being in a just thick soup of muck. And it was not bright, so I was having trouble seeing as well. But we were going down a corridor, going through all these rooms, and I'm like, geez, this place is bigger than I thought. And they're like, here's what I wanted you to see. And we came out into this room and I could see perfectly. And they brought us to this. Makes me very sad. This was really an upsetting experience for me because they brought forth this person who had lived his entire life in this room, in this area, never seeing daylight, never going outside. This was my impression. And he was short and he was bald and he was human, but he was a genetic experiment and was not normal. He was badly deformed. with very thin limbs, hunched over, very pale skin, deformed head and face, a hideous mixture of genetics that wasn't fully human, I don't think, but I honestly couldn't tell you. And I was heartbroken because they said this guy is being used as a servant, a slave. He works here. He's not paid. This is his life. It's entirely in this room. And there was more than one of them, but I could not look at them. And I was just face to face with this guy. And he looked at me and I looked at him. I felt like he could see me. I'm not entirely sure about that. But they wanted me to see him, whoever this guide was, who I could not see. And I didn't see who these other people were, but I sensed them. But it was so upsetting. It was so upsetting. It made me cry, actually, while I was there and afterwards. I woke up really upset because my heart went out to this poor creature, this poor man.
Was that the only person you saw there, or did you see anything else?
There was equipment, there was tables and cages, and there were other people, but I couldn't go there. I did not want to see anyone else, and so I sort of blocked it out. Because I do know I experienced more there than I remember, but it was too hard. It was too upsetting to know that these sort of things are happening, which I had read about to some degree, but to actually go there and feel it, and again, from the quality of his presence, I knew this was a real being. I knew it, and the sadness in his eyes was just too much for me to handle.
Are did you get the sense that this was like a U.S. owned government facility, or was it
100%
something else? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. This was something done by our own military, our own government. That was my sense. It's funny, when you're out of body, you do hear people talking, but a lot of it is just very much a knowing, a telepathic communication. Impressions are very strong. So you will just know things because they are impressed upon you. That was difficult. I much prefer going to the other side and meeting enlightened people, which is one thing I really wanted to do. I remember popping out of body once, and I was in my living room, and I said, I want to meet an enlightened master, someone who's truly enlightened, an enlightened person. And this woman appeared on my balcony. She was gorgeous, this beautiful blonde woman wearing a sparkly gown, really pretty and very attractive. I'm like, wow, look at you. And I rushed up to her, and she smiled at me. And just blonde hair, blue eyes, a really pretty lady. And she grabbed my arm, my elbow, and my hand. And she says, okay, we're going to go. Do not close your eyes. That was her instructions. And I said, okay. And then whoosh, we went up so fast that I did close my eyes because she scared the living daylights out of me. And I, remembering her instructions, I immediately opened them. So it was just a split second. And we were on the other side by this point. And she's dropping me in a field of grass. And there's a man sitting on a chair that's floating. It's just a little wooden chair floating 2 inches off the ground. And I see her going off on her way, and I'm right in front of this man who looks like Obi-Wan Kenobi. He really did. A gray beard, gray hair, and kind of a robe, and very kind of not a super smiley, loving guy, very stern and wisdom, very wise. And I'm like, oh, and I kind of had to stop myself from falling to my knees and, kissing his shoes kind of thing, because it's just a lot when you see someone like this. And I'm like, wow, look at you. And I'm like, gosh, I said, do you have any advice for me? And he did. And he spoke out loud, punctuating each word. And it was, and I've done this before, they will give you weird riddles. They don't just give you answers. They give you like a little riddle or a koan. You know what I mean? A Japanese koan, Koan. Just a weird phrase is what often happens. And that's what he did. He says, when you do something, do it absolutely. And I'm like, huh. And I stared at him. I'm like, what the heck does that supposed to mean? Is what I'm thinking. Right. And I was going to ask him, but this tunnel appears behind me, and he's like, go. And I'm looking like, shoot, there's a tunnel. And I'm whoosh, and I'm pulled through it and popped back in my body. And somewhat irked. I'm like, well, that was a little weird. Great. What is that? What am I supposed to do with that? And I kept running that phrase through my head. I'm like, and what was weird to me, it was the use of the word absolutely. It's like, when you do something, absolutely do it. That's not what he said. He says, do it absolutely. So what does that even mean? I ended up looking it up in the dictionary. Like, what does absolutely really mean? How do you do something absolutely? And it was really interesting. It's without limitation, positively, without expectation or attachment, which are really kind of echoing themes in spiritual texts. Don't become attached to anything. The power of positive thinking. Doing things completely. Giving it your all. So all of that was sort of phrased in a way, in one sentence. It had a real deep meaning to it that I'd later sort of, parsed out and unraveled. I'm like, wow, that actually was really cool. Do things without attachment. Do things without expectation. Do things, without limitation. Because you see that with people. They limit themselves. People are very self-sabotaging. I can't do it. Yes, you can. You can do anything. It's really cool. It's one of my favorite experiences that I had.
What other experiences did you have? I think you mentioned at one point in time looking or exploring parts of the solar system, starting with the moon.
Yeah, I had a couple of really cool. That's right, couple of alien base experience. Let me just go back to what's called the Malibu Anomaly, which is something I wrote about in one of my UFO books, where there's a whole bunch of USO activity off the Southern California coast. And I mapped it all out. And I'm like, gosh, there's something going on here. I wonder if there's an undersea base. Because I had talked to a few contactees who said they were taken to what they thought was an underground or undersea base. And all these UFOs are coming up out of one area, and sometimes in great numbers. I'm thinking, there's something going on here. And then lo and behold, years into my research, there's this anomaly discovered off the coast of Malibu, 6 miles out. And it's this huge kind of artificial looking structure, semi-artificial. It's got what looked like pillars, a really flat top, and a tunnel. And I'm on the fence about it, but it was right where I kind of pinpointed all this activity. I'm like, there might be something down here. And so you can see images of this. It's all over the internet, Malibu Anomaly. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, I'm going to put that on my list, see if I can get there. And I would always forget. And it took me years. And finally, I'm like, okay, I remember. I'm like, Malibu Anomaly, let's go. And it's not far from where I live right now. So off I went. And I got to the coast. I'm like, oh, wow, this is working. And this is amazing. And I dived into the water, which is always fun. And I was real sad to see that there wasn't a whole lot of fish down there, that it was not nearly as filled with wildlife as I had hoped. There were some, but and finally I reached that point. I'm like, this is it. And I went down, and it's 1,000 feet down or so. And it got real dark. And I couldn't see. And so I was kind of disappointed. I'm like, I can't see anything here. But I started to get impressions. And I went into this, what appears to be a tunnel, and it was a tunnel. And I went right up to the wall looking for artificial constructions or ships or UFO, anything. And I did. I couldn't see with my outer eyes, but you have inner vision as well. And you do get impressions. And I saw what appeared to be sort of how would I describe it? Like a jigsaw, like surface with construction, I guess, not natural, actual pieces fitted together. I'm like, what is this? And my impression, it was a ship. It was all very vague and very loose impressions. And I'm like, well, I don't quite see what's going on here. And I tried and tried, but I just couldn't get very deep into it. But it was cool. It was really interesting. And I thought, well, that's something. Uh, but I couldn't see physically in the way I really wanted to. But it was interesting. So that was somewhat brief, but I made it to what I perceived to be this structure and felt like it was, in fact, a structure, which I later found out very well might be. Because, and this is not in the book about this that I wrote, Undersea UFO Base, but one of the witnesses contacted me later and he says, I've got information for you. This is just an aside, real quick. He says, I went to Las Vegas and I met a Native American elder. And we started talking about the Malibu Anomaly. He says, oh, yeah, we know about it. The Native American elder did. He's a Chumash Indian. They lived in this area for thousands of years. He says, oh, yeah, we have oral traditions about it. In our oral traditions, the sea level used to be much lower, and we would sit on the top of this thing and fish off of it. And all we can tell you is that we did not build it. We don't know who built it. And the inference was that it was, in fact, a built structure. I don't know. It's just an interesting aside. But yeah, another time, Robert Monroe talks about going to the moon. It's like, wow, that's got to be an experience. Let's do that. And one evening popped out and I saw the full moon. I'm like, oh, let's do this. And I had about 5 minutes of awareness. You feel like an hourglass and it's stripping down. And you know how long you can stay awake. It's very peculiar. But I'm like, okay, I've got 5 minutes. Let's go. And I stared at the moon. I'm like, let's go. And I'm taking off. I'm like, not going fast enough. Faster, 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 faster. And slowly I would go faster and faster. And then boom, it starts to really loom large. I'm, whoa, oh my gosh, it's getting huge. It fills my entire field of vision. And then I'm coming in for a landing. And I landed on the moon. And I was so stunned. I was so jazzed. And I'm thinking to myself, this is another crazy thing. I'm never going to talk about this. No one will ever believe me. This is insane. How am I going to tell people this? And I'm looking around at all the, it's very, really, really beautiful because there's no air, right? So you can see things much more crisply and everything's just beautifully vivid, even though it's all, white, gray, black. The shadows are really black and all variations of white all the way to gray. And, smooth little pebbles and big rocks and hills. And it was really cool. I'm just wandering around looking at it. And Robert Monroe says he never saw anything up there in terms of structures. I had done some research into this previously, and I'm pretty much convinced there's stuff up there. Talked to some firsthand witnesses from NASA who are whistleblowers and highly placed. One guy was a photographer who had a top secret clearance and says he talked to the astronauts and developed some of their film and that there were structures up there. And I didn't believe him at the time because I'd never really looked into it. So I started doing research into the moon and was shocked to see that there is some really good evidence that there's stuff up there, alien bases. And that's a theme that comes up repeatedly in contactee accounts. And I've talked to people who said, yes, they've been to bases on the moon. I'm like, okay, I don't know what to think of it. So I started looking around, and lo and behold, there is this. I'm just kind of wandering around. I'm like, I've got like 2 minutes left now, 1 minute. Time's running out, and I just racing along the surface, and I came upon this dome that you would never see from Earth because it's made out of the same structure. And the only way you could tell it wasn't natural was it was polished, smooth. It was round. It was a perfect half dome, like you would see on a Coliseum or something. And I'm like, wow, that's artificial. That looks artificial to me. And I went straight inside it and was shocked to see that there was structure in there. And it was a long corridor with tables on either side and more tables. And on each table were like equipment, really modern electronic equipment and tables, and I'm kind of having trouble seeing because it's not fully bright in there. But there are men, military guys. And I don't know if this is true or not, because I started to really get conflicted about this. I'm like, am I making this up? I have no idea. But I was very curious because I wanted to see what they were doing. And I went up to one of the tables, and there was a biological experiment going on with some sort of creature, and animals being spliced together. So it was like half dog, half reptile. I'm like looking at it, trying to make out like what is that? And it was very upsetting. And again, I got really angry because I'm like, what are they? They should not be doing this. This is not proper. And strong emotion always pulls you back, which is what happened. So I don't know. That was one experience where I went to the moon, but probably one of my best ever was meeting Dolly. I had mentioned her earlier, where I went to her house in Florida. She saw me. She came to my house, and she's really good at this stuff. She's like, "Oh, you're good at out of body." I'm like, "Dolly, compared to you, you're better at this than me." We argue about that, but whatever. But one day she's like, "I want to show you something," and she took me out to the Kuiper Belt, which is deep in the outer realms of our solar system, where basically the asteroid belt and the debris surrounding our solar system, which is a lot of it. And astronomers are now confirming that that's enormously thick with all kinds of, asteroids, I guess you'd call them. And it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life, to see this unending asteroid field stretching out in all directions. Just incredibly beautiful. And I'm just studying it going, wow. And Dolly's like floating next to me, enjoying my awe. And I'm like, wow, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. They'll glint, each have different brightness. And they weren't really moving so much, but everything it's just really incredible, never ending field of different sizes of rocks and different colors, grays mostly, but slightly colored here and there. And then I turned to my right and I saw something that was not natural. and it startled me. And Dolly's pointing it out. And I'm like, whoa. And it was glowing kind of orangey and perfectly round and huge. And I started flying towards it a little bit to study it.
Is this like a sphere or a saucer shape?
No, it was a perfect sphere. And really pretty and very, very smooth and obviously artificial. And I was stunned to see it because this stood out. Everything else was largely gray with slight variations, but this was bright orange looking to me. And smooth. But I couldn't see this. It was almost like lit up, sort of glowing, right? So I couldn't say I saw a hard surface to it, but it was clearly artificial. I mean, that was my impression. And I was stunned to see it. And my excitement level grew too much for me to handle. And I got pulled back, and I called her up, Dolly, the next day. And she's like, what do you remember? What do you remember? And because she says she's taking me on things that I don't remember doing. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't remember that. And she's like really curious, like, do you remember anything? I'm like, yeah, I remember you took me to the Kuiper Belt. And she's like, great. Anything else? I'm like, yeah. What was that big thing? That big round thing? She's like, you saw it, you remember? I'm like, yeah, that was amazing. It was so beautiful. She's like, oh, I so wanted you to see that and remember. What do you think it was? I'm like, I don't know, but it was artificial. And she's like, yep. I'm like, I don't think it was man-made. And she's like, yep. She's like, that's an alien base. She's a contactee. She's the subject of my latest book, Symmetry. She's a fully conscious contactee. She doesn't need to go under hypnosis or anything. She remembers it all and has had a lifetime of experiences. And so I wish we could have gone inside, but I don't remember doing that. She didn't say anything about that. That's all I really remember. But she was thrilled to see that I had actually remembered seeing it. She's like, I really wanted you to see that because I told you about it. So yeah, that's her calling right now.
Well, that's interesting. Probably, some her ears were ringing, I guess.
Yeah. Oh.
All right. Well, any other experiences that you've had there? Is that kind of the sum total thus far?
That's pretty much it. Yeah, at this point, but I've got more stuff on my list. I mean, there's so much stuff you can do out of body. Went to a healing temple. That was so awesome. Going to the Akashic Library. I got to see all my past lives. That was the highest I've ever been, dimensionally speaking.
Didn't you see future lives too?
I did. Yeah. It was just, they took me inside it. I would have been happy to just stand on the outside of this thing and look at the pillar because it was like rose quartz glowing. I'm like, wow, let's just stay here and look at this. Like, no, we want you to go inside to a huge corridor into a room. There were these screens and they started flashing my past lives at me like a deck of cards. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of them. All different people, black, white, Asian, you name it, men, women. I died.
Anything non-human?
Not really, not that I noticed. Though I do have some indication of that because there's been times, well, actually, now that you bring it up, yeah, I do remember possibly having alien past lives, but it's all I would see is my face, and it's not human. So I didn't really get a whole lot of information about it. But yeah, at some point, all these lives are flat, and then it stops on this one life, and I sensed it was me in a future life as a fully enlightened human. And he was this beautiful man, bald with silvery eyes, and he steps out of the screen. So I felt like I was standing in front of him. And that was too much. I did fall to my knees and started crying because he was looking down at me with love. And I just had this wonderful feeling like, yeah, I made it. That's me. And one day I'm going to be in a place where it's kind of the ultimate goal of, understanding and wisdom and true, full, open, psychic love, there to where enlightenment, which is a sort of a goal, I think, of going through the human experience and reaching that state of what it means to be a fully realized human being. So yeah, that was so awesome. I love that experience. But yeah, some alien past lives, I think, which I think would only be logical. Yeah, I had some I went to see a couple of channelers, and they're like, "You were an alien in a past life. You know that, right?" I'm like, no, I did not know that. That was early on when I just started exploring these weird subjects. Gosh, to hear myself talking about it, I sometimes cringe because I used to be so skeptical, very scientific minded, very analytical, very much a materialist. Now here I am far on the other end of the spectrum thinking, oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, like I said in an earlier episode, there's a difference between believing and knowing, right? And these experiences, like for you it's knowing because you've personally had these experiences, and it's hard to convey that reality to others without them having experienced it themselves. So I think it's fair for most people to they don't have to believe, but they should be open to the fact that people have experienced these things for whatever caused the experience. It is still their reality, and trying to understand and grasp what that reality actually is part of what makes us all human. Yeah. Right? Just learning and growing and
yeah,
and things
don't
like
believe
that.
me. Yeah, I'm fine with people.
Well, I want to believe. I have been seeking these experiences, and hopefully, something. I'll have my own experience so that I know.
Yeah. Well, belief has no effect on the truth. Either it's true or it's not. You can believe it or not. But yeah, I would love for people to believe me, but it's no sweat off my back either way. But what I would say is, try it. I absolutely encourage you. If you don't believe me, you are going to be shocked, and you can thank me later. But I will tell you, this is real. It's been proven in a laboratory setting. I've proved it to myself and others. You can do this. It's a natural human ability. It's not hard. And the benefits are unbelievable. Flying alone is worth putting the effort. But boy, when you get to the other side and meet your deceased loved one and have that reunion, it will absolutely change you. When I met my mother the first time on the other side, I count that as in the top 10 experiences of my entire life. Seriously, I mean, it is the best thing ever. Please try this. I cannot encourage people enough to just give it a go. Don't worry about it. It's not hard. And yeah, it might be a little scary at first, but it's so worth it. And you will believe it when it happens to you. Because we will. One thing we do know as an absolute truth is we will die. And what do you think happens? The evidence for life after death is outstanding.
Yeah, you better believe, because otherwise your belief is that you turn into dust and cease to exist. It's not a comforting thought, right?
No, and those are the people who sometimes have a hard time. I remember, well, I don't want to get too into it because we'd talk forever, but yeah, there are earthbound spirits, and that can be a problem if you don't believe in life after death. Just be open to the possibility, and I think you'll be fine. Most people will be fine, but yeah, try it. It's worth it. Do the exercises. Test reality each day. Meditate. Write down your dreams. All of these are steps that you can do, and it's not hard.
And even if nothing happens, like, there are positive benefits to meditating, right?
Oh, yeah.
That are quantifiable and shown in experiment after experiment. So it's kind of like Pascal's wager. It's just you have nothing to lose, right? So what, and everything to gain if it's true and it works for you. So, All right, Preston. With that, thank you very much for donating your time to me and my audience, and I hope they enjoy this episode as they clearly have very much enjoyed all the prior episodes that we've done, and they should definitely check out your YouTube channel, which is.
If you just punch in my name, it'll take you there. It's UFOs and the Paranormal is what it's called, with Preston Dennett. But yeah, if you just punch in my name, it should take you there. Preston Dennett official channel. I think it's I forget what I actually call it.
It might take you to my YouTube channel too, because I think you're like the number one search term. So just if you see mine, just scroll past it and go straight to Preston Dennett, because he goes into a lot more detail on many of these topics, and it's a very good channel. So I encourage people to check it out. Anyway, thank you, Preston. And I'll actually let you have the last words, because you have like a common phrase that you always say at the end of your show.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thanks, Sean. First of all, I really appreciate. I love talking about these subjects. I think it's super important. It will change your life if you can go out of body. And yeah, I do have an episode on this in detail about how to do it on my YouTube channel. I've got a website. I'm on all over social media. And yeah, for me, the most important thing in life is, releasing yourself from fear, working on yourself, meditating, and most importantly, having fun. Gotta have fun, or why are you here?
Thanks, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.